trying to re-become villagers. It means to try to rediscover and re-inhabit what it means to be a place-based community, that we actually decide that we live somewhere. We're not just housed somewhere, but we become more full spectrum participants in the communities where we live.
Until we start meeting each other person to person, human to human, we're probably not going to create these seemingly impossible things. We'll just keep gathering people and creating the commons just by gathering until something starts to move.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. I'm on Vancouver Island in British Columbia at O.U.R Ecovillage with the founder of our Ecovillage, co-founder Brandy Gallagher, and also with Mark Lakeman from Portland, who is the co-founder of City Repair. We're here today because you, Mark, came up to talk about what? Reclaiming, reowning ourselves as villagers, even in the city?
Yeah. Basically to bring constructive, creative, proactive tools to people who are gathered here today, and to present stories of things that have been going on for the last decade and a half in Portland, which is a remarkable place characterized by constructive, positive activity. And then also we did some workshops that were ways to kind of replicate the same sort of participatory designing that we do in Portland that then leads to participatory implementation.
Okay, City Repair. I always found that as as an odd name, but you started something that has spread to a lot of the neighborhoods in Portland and changing, the landscape of the city. So give our viewers a taste of some of those projects, maybe from where you started in intersections.
Yeah. Okay, well, first of all, the cause that we're working on, as it relates to what we were talking about today about really trying to re-become villagers, it means to try to rediscover and re-inhabit what it means to be a place-based community, that we actually decide that we live somewhere. We're not just housed somewhere, but we become more full spectrum participants in the communities where we live, not just to be housed there and to go elsewhere to work, to make money to pay for where we live, but in many ways to be like villagers who live more integrated lives, who live and work and play and love together with the same people. And when that happens, a lot less goes wrong and a lot more has a chance to go right. So our most basic project is to help people get off the couch, to get outside, to start to realize that the space between their homes could actually bring them together and not divide them like a traffic corridor does. And we point out to people that American communities and Canadian communities are missing gathering places all across the land because we live in developments. We don't live in villages, and yet we've come from villages. Villages are where we learned how to speak, where we actually generated all forms of culture, all patterns of culture, and yet now we live in a place where we don't even know the people where we live. And strangely, it's all across the land. It's not occasionally a group of people don't know each other. It's all across North America, at least north of the Mexican border. Why? Well, we help people to ask that question and then to come up with an answer for themselves as they do things like transform streets, transform their own yards, basically invent forms of commons that should always have been there by coming
Commons. That's something that's not in our normal language. I want to pause for a second and say, I'm thinking, Brandy, and we'll get back to the cities, is that part of what you're trying to create in the city is what you have in this rural O.U.R Ecovillage. Because that's a grid, and this is as organic as the landform. So just maybe describe a little bit of the rural village that you have here. And then I want to go back to the city.
I think that's the big link between this kind of work, is whether it's city repair or rural repair, what we're looking for is to recreate the gathering spaces. And something you see definitely in this kind of area, in North America in particular, rural communities also don't really have a commons left. We don't gather for Christmas at, you know, the neighborhood community center anymore. The best gathering places that you're gonna happen to find are shopping centers. And that's about as much as it gets in a rural kind of setting. So really one of the big challenges in North America in the rural settings is it's not legal in the land use design to actually be village culture. You are either zoned to be a farm, or you're zoned to be a park, but spaces are set up in a very sort of mono-zoned design. And so to recreate and re-become villagers, we need to actually be able to be in rural places that we're allowed to be villagers.
Which is the same challenge that you run into in the cities.
Yeah, it's really an excellent point. It is exactly the same challenge, whether it's rural or urban. Basically, the planning patterns of the country, first of all, they're not generated by communities because they wouldn't look the same, but they're a perfunctory attitude towards life in which, whether it's the city or a rural condition, land is designated for a function that tends to be, as Brandy said, have a kind of monocultural focus, to be productive or to be housing. But culture is not like that. Culture is much more integrated, broader spectrum. We talk about multidisciplinary cultures to do something, you know, tremendous when we want to enact something that we design and build in this culture, where we bring together different disciplines. And that's really like creating a professional culture, project by project. Well, that's how culture itself is supposed to be. I mean, when we're talking about sustainable culture, let's focus on the culture for a second. It means that you have a broader spectrum of people that are working together, and not just to accomplish task by task something, but actually to inhabit a culture of people together who share ideas, who do things for mutual benefit, and at best who live and work and play together. Because then they develop a deep, resilient affinity. Actually, resilience comes out of their affinity for each other and their love for each other. So it seems that culture isn't in any zone, because it's essentially, it must be integrative. So it's almost as if culture itself has been outlawed. And I'm sorry to say that, it sounds so strange. Like someone might say, well, I mean, we have culture, what are you talking about? But I just want to point out that culture is something that people voluntarily generate. They create as a reflection of themselves. And on the other hand, we in North America are finding that we live in developments that are created by developers, financed by bankers, and they have their own set of priorities, but you notice there's not a single public square in nearly any neighborhood across the land. And that's largely because for developers, they don't really think that a cultural nexus where everything fuses together and all this stuff emerges is important.
I mean, I was raised in a suburb in the Bay Area, exactly that, little houses, you know, in the suburbs, and that has, and so what I see that we want, if you're doing integrated, is if you're going to be living and working and gardening and the kids playing together and you know, what I think of as and celebrating together. That's a very, I mean, I can sense the longing for that kind of, that we all have.
And maybe you want a public gathering space in there, and you want to learn together, and you want to be a learning community.
Yes.
And maybe you want to protect wild spaces and natural systems. When you try and package that all into one, again, whether it's urban or rural, we're not there anymore, really, in North America. We've monoed as much as we possibly can. We monocrop. If you look at all of the polycultures that were healthy, diverse, rich systems, be they social systems or land use design or just even how we grow food now, everything has gone from poly to mono more and more. And the lack of health in those systems seems to be from having the lack of diversity. So how are we going to recreate as villagers settings when people actually often will leave urban centers to go rural. There's a time when they have kids or whatever has people go back to the land and they go rural. But then we've got another layer in culture now that is so based on consumerism and rugged individualism that people leave, they go to the rural setting and they don't want to know their neighbors. They want their holding of land, they want their hobby farm maybe, and really don't please come over and visit. I'm going out to the back 40 so I don't have to be around people. And we actually have neighbors that have said that to us. We've come here to get away from it all. And so how do we recreate village culture with all those elements happening simultaneously? It's a big piece of work we have ahead of us as a humanity, and it's probably the only thing we have left now to do in order to look at how we're not going to just live sustainably, but how are we going to live regeneratively?
Yes, regeneratively, yeah. So how are you doing it? How's it happening in Portland? Give us some on the ground pictures of.
Sure. Well, there's forms that the projects take, and they're all locally generated. So as near as possible, it's as if they're indigenous, because they're coming from the people who live right there. Our most famous, kind of infamous project, one of the ones that has replicated the most, is the transformation of street intersections into public gathering places. It's a really elegant, simple idea. It's basically to say, or to recognize, that the lands that our own ancestors came from, where villages were created by the people who lived there, at the convergence of pathways, there was a recognition that people tend to bump into each other there. They tend to gather there. In fact, sometimes an intersection itself is a destination because there's a fountain there or some sort of community function. And so the village heart is actually an intersection. It's actually a crossroads. So we basically looked at the fact that, Portland, like Victoria, not far away from us now, is in a colonial grid that was designed really on paper, not specifically designed for any particular place. And it's based most famously on Roman expansionism. Well, that doesn't help to build community, because first of all, the community is not creating something that it identifies with. Our communities, in this circumstance, are used to building stuff according to somebody else's imperative. Okay, so we woke up inside of that and we said, oh my gosh, no wonder we don't know each other. There's nowhere to gather. No wonder we don't know each other. There's nowhere to sit anywhere in the entire community. And there's no park without crossing a busy street, and there's not even any crosswalks. So we're in a really poorly designed community, and it was poorly designed no matter what, because we didn't design it. It was designed by someone else who we never even have met, who drew it out on paper, and they're long dead. And they drew the lines and basically allocated the lots to house a certain number of houses for sale. That was their imperative. So we said to ourselves, okay, if we're even going to know each other, much less care about each other, much less work together, much less make sure each other's kids are safe out in the streets, then it behooves us to act on our own behalf. And in our case, we actually had to break the law because it wasn't legal yet to transform street intersections into public squares. And I'm happy to say that it is now. It's free, and it's possible for everyone to do all across the city as long as they design it and fund it themselves. So that's our kind of our most famous project, but interestingly, the one that's replicated the most is a little complement to one of those intersections where we said, well, a good public square should have a good library. So we built this little free library 17 years ago, and we had no idea, well, we sort of hoped it would replicate, but we had no idea it would be quite as successful as it is. But according to articles that came out last year, it's the first of what are now numbered 9,000 such things across the world.
Wow.
So this is a story that should definitely be told. How in the world is something transmitted across the world into even other countries without even being organized to happen? But people see it, they love it, they can't believe it, they build it in their own yard or somewhere in their neighborhood. So but I would say, from the very beginning, we knew that everybody living in a grid anywhere was frustrated with the absence of place, and they noticed the lack of participation and their feeling of intense disempowerment and isolation. So for us, it was like, oh my gosh, we can change the world, because what we do here will inspire people everywhere else that are feeling the same way as us and are beset by the same restrictions and constraints and regimentation and attitude toward humanity. And that's been what's happening. So it's a great guess.
And what I see in the pictures that you've shared is it's colorful, it's fun, people have they get to know each other while they're doing that. What was one that was remarkable to me is the 4-day project that transformed an alleyway, getting the junk out and the concrete out, and how they set the children to go find the people in the neighborhood who had pickup trucks and excavators. It's like suddenly you're doing mapping of the assets in the community, and you're getting people involved, and you're getting the kids involved, and it's and I could imagine, imagine the spirit of the whole thing is so exciting to people, and they've done it themselves, and they walk by it every day,
and it generates a common story where they all can talk with pride about something that connects them all, and it's like a regenesis moment. It's extraordinary to see.
I bet it's really satisfying for you.
Heart-opening entirely. Yeah.
So thank you. How have those ripples come and touched our Ecovillage? Because you're part of this.
Yeah,
in a different way.
and I have to say a lot of your work has inspired a lot of the work at our Ecovillage and that we've done in the wider community. And so really having to look at how do you have intelligent design or nature's design in a rural setting. When you get out of the cities, how do you have that happen in a way, biomimicry, but how do you permaculturalize, how do you replicate nature systems and create your entire larger community into an ecosystem design? So asset mapping for sure, but I want to go back to this part about it not being legal, because as soon as you start to put the pieces of the puzzle back together, there's not just the challenges of land use and the legalities of, for example, at our Ecovillage, we're a park, we're a school, we're a non-certified organic farm, we're a residential village, and we're allowed 10 homes on the site, on the 25 acres. We're allowed food services and accommodation services, unlimited businesses related to agriculture, and one for-profit business. That would be sort of about 8 different land use zoning allowances. And what's happened there is it's repackaged or polycultured the land use zoning. But then you take on things like, if you're really trying to look at how to live in a regenerative design and put together the entire community to start trying to divert things from our landfills, you're trying to recycle and really repurpose. Right now, there's a building a week that comes down in our community. In Vancouver, incidentally, there's a building a day, whether it's a commercial or a residential building. One a day headed for the landfill is an incredible amount of materials. But if you start to become villagers in a rural setting, everybody needs everything for your farm, for your residences and your homes. You might even start to build homes that have multiple people in those homes, and hopefully even intergenerationally, family can live there again. But that's not legal either. In order to repurpose all those building materials, oftentimes you have to have them re-engineered or engineered, period. So suddenly you're dealing with layers and layers of the challenge of just re-becoming villagers. And we made an agreement when we first came here that we would do everything legally. So a little different than we broke the law. We actually said we want to partner with the law. We don't want to fight for peace anymore. We don't want to take it to the streets and say we're going to hammer on this until we get some headway. We said we're going to create relationship, and we're going to fully partner with every level of regulatory process that we can. In fact, we're going to invite everybody to dinner and everybody to the potluck, and no more of this division between people and sort of holding each other in our roles, like you're the bank manager and you're the local bureaucrat that's going to decide on whether we can do this project or not. We'll just keep gathering people and creating the commons just by gathering until something starts to move. And we actually say that it's not going to sustain itself unless you have government, academia, business and corporate and the grassroots community in a rural setting. You really need all four major stakeholders. If you get academia in there recording and documenting it all, that's all the better, because these stories need to be told over and over. And there has to be a way to start putting back the pieces of the puzzle and become a holistic way of being villagers again.
Well, I just want to kind of raise an observation or a question. Well, first of all, to observe that this is the same plight all across the landmass. It's very interesting. You might think, well, I mean, there's a lot of municipalities that are all adopting their own planning codes. Why are they all exactly the same? Somebody might say, well, because that's what makes sense. You know, but I think that there would be a little bit more diversity, even among people that basically are the same class and the same sex, you know, men making choices from a professional class. But still, they would have some different perspectives about their priorities. But for some reason, it's as if integrated, holistic living is just off the table. There's a monocultural attitude toward the way that we will all live. And frankly, I mean, you know, let's just look at old historical photos, both in the USA and Canada, where they were celebrating the westward march of empire. And that is the impetus that laid out these patterns and these practices and this whole attitude, not just toward the land, but toward people themselves. That we would be a working class, that we would be consumers, that the land would be a commodity that we would consume and use for supposedly its highest best use, which would be to be liquefied and turned over. In fact, the very word lot connotates that it's just simply a market commodity that keeps changing uses as it becomes a higher and higher, more use, more dense, more high-rise, or whatever it might be. So we're actually fighting a historical attitude, and it's absolutely corrupt and unjust, and that attitude is lucky that we even interact with it, you know, because it doesn't deserve our respect. But the people whose jobs it is to safeguard and promulgate that stuff, those are real good people. They are real true people.
Yeah.
They have families. So we want to work with them respectfully, and we actually want to help them to help us, because the work that we're doing is of everyone's benefit, and the work that they're supporting is the patterns of unsustainable culture that is destroying the very fabric of our reality. So we're trying to help them to help us, because we're trying to help them just to start with.
Yeah. You're bringing people into the village, or just giving them a taste of this.
And it's re-inviting them back to the table. It's not even bringing them in. They were there. We were all here all along.
were.
We just actually need to all get to the same table together. And there is countless examples of, you know, those places that everybody, that's the last thing in the world a lot of people want to do is take on regulatory reform or policy work. Anybody who's been an activist is like, whoa, no, I want to go do something. I don't want to have to wade through the quagmire of all that paper. And yet, if you start to have real and authentic relationships with those folks, they want to do the paperwork. They actually want to see the change happen. So we have such amazing stereotypes about people's roles and or what bureaucracies are. Until we start meeting each other person to person, human to human, we're probably not going to create these seemingly impossible things.
I hear that in both of your stories. We are we are relating human to human in our neighborhood, on our street, you know, in our rural community. It's like that's the making of the village. It seems to me from what you're saying. We have about 2 minutes each from each of you. I mean, to wrap. Any last thoughts, visions?
Well, for some reason right now I'm remembering having met Jaime Lerner. He's the former mayor of Curitiba, Brazil, and he came to Portland and gave a workshop. You know, he's famous for so many impactful, constructive changes in Brazil. But he came to Portland and he saw some of the things that we've done, like our homeless village initiatives, and he said, "This is embarrassing." He said, "This is amazing, it's wonderful, it's the best you have, but this is the best you have." And he wasn't insulting us at all, not at all. He was saying where we're from, when people have a basic desperate need to be housed, we allow them to live on the fallow land that is available so that they can take care of themselves. We certainly don't sweep them away. He shamed us. He shamed the whole country. He said, if this is the best that you have, And I laud you for what you've created. On the other hand, you should be ashamed as a
Yes.
nation, because you've housed, 65 people, and there are thousands dying in the streets. So I just want to say, it's a relative thing. We are working as hard as we can, but in many ways we're behind an 8 ball that we can't even see. And our definition of success is far exceeded in other communities that are more compassionate, less mechanistic, less regimented, less confused than we are.
And you, Brandy, any last thoughts or visions? Or?
When I try and pin what is the essence of that story and how does that come to be, it just always brings me back to, we're a brilliant species. We can figure our way into all these challenges. We obviously could figure our way through to the next thing. And yet we don't choose to. We don't take on climate change fully. We don't take on world hunger. All the biggest challenges on the planet that were ours in the making, there's something that holds us back from it. And this is the most curious thing to me of all. 10,000 people come to our Ecovillage a year. They leave inspired. They're gonna go build things and do things and make things and, fall in love with their homes again and start creating a sense of place. And yet, after a little bit, the romance of that evolves, and they either fall back onto the couch or they fade off into despair and think, I don't know how, or I can't, or really I don't have that much inspiration anymore, and they don't pull it off. So what is it going to take for us to go from that sort of peak experience that actually brings something to life and keep it going? How do we keep ourselves going? And it really keeps coming back to that last dimension, is the human and social dimension. And in re-becoming villagers, it feels like, it seems to me that we have to heal ourselves and then heal the relationships with each other in order to actually fully reintegrate into becoming villagers again.
And I think I would add that from those, we're creating new stories of how do we live here? How do we live together? How do we live in the world, in the natural world? Because the stories, the the exploited stories that you're talking about, and contrasted with Curitiba, is like the people that leave here at our Ecovillage have at least the seeds for new stories of different ways to live. Thank you both for just this start, seeding some more new stories. You're watching Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson, and we're happy to bring you people creating the new story. Join us next time.